So let's talk about the different personas or desktops that you could switch between in Affinity Designer. I think this is what really differentiates the program as well as the shape tools, is you have the designer persona, which is kind of the vector environment where you have your Illustrator tools that we've kind of been using, like the pen tool and the shape tool. And you have this other persona. You can switch to pixel persona, and it switches its dashboard so that you can do photo editing right here in the vector program, which is fantastic because with Adobe Illustrator you don't have a whole lot of photo editing capabilities. So this has some built in. It does not replace Photoshop. Affinity has something called Affinity Photo, which is kind of your Photoshop replacement. So this gives you just a few more tools, but not really a total photo editing replacement, but it does give you just enough to get by. And there's also this export persona, which helps you with artboards and size and exporting. So if you ever want to switch between kind of editing photos and doing your vector program, it's up here in your top personas. It's basically like different dashboards that you can kind of switch between, which is really nice. So I'm going to go in the designer persona, which is what we started off in, and I'm going to go down to this tool called the place image tool, and I'm going to just go ahead and place an image. Go ahead and do this dollar bill image. I'm just going to go ahead and process. It's a pretty large image. We have our crop tool down here where we can go ahead and crop this. Instead of it bending and changing to whatever shape it is, it's actually officially cropped, and it's kind of a really nice option here that you kind of see in Adobe InDesign, but you could do it right here using that crop tool, or you can unselect the crop tool and then drag it and expand it out this way to make it larger or smaller. So that was the crop tool. So now that we have our photo, we could switch our personas, switch into that pixel persona right up here up top, and now we have some of these photo editing tools. So we can have the freehand selection tool. I can select specific areas and go ahead and change certain aspects of that. So if I wanted to select George Washington here, I can go ahead and get this brush selection tool. So this will be a little bit more like a Photoshop tool. And I'm just going to click and drag, and you can change its width. The smaller the width, the finer the selections are going to be. And I'm just clicking and dragging, and I'm selecting him. And just like Photoshop, I can delete, or I can copy and paste and have a second copy. So to be able to do this in what's traditionally a vector program is amazing. I've always wanted to be able to manipulate photos and cut particular photos out. It's not as extensive as Photoshop. You can select and do some things, but you're not going to have a lot of the duotone effects and a lot of the Photoshop type stuff. You're going to be able to do kind of the bare minimum. You have the paint bucket tool. You have a blur tool, so you can go and blur certain areas a lot more than others. You can select and blur. So if I just want to blur the center here, I can select my blur tool down here. I can change the width of my blur tool, just like that. Of course, if I want to go back, I can do Control or Command Z and go back in time in my history, just like I would any other Adobe program. So a lot of those keyboard shortcuts are the same, which makes it really easy to transition. Let's create a quick social media graphic just to practice some of our tools we learned, but also to play around with the type tool as well. I just went to New Document. We're going to create a web document, and it's going to be 1280 by 800. Let's go ahead and create what we have before and click on OK. There's also something called the artboard tool, which is right down here where you can actually create different artboards just like you can in Adobe Illustrator. You can create different sized artboards here where you can do different social media size posts and start to work within the artboards. We're going to go ahead and work within the confines of this particular document. So let's go ahead and place a photo. We're just going to place a photo I have in my downloads. I'm going to go ahead and just create something kind of generic. I'm going to get the world loaded in here. And once again, you can kind of scale this down, or you can use the crop tool to crop it in a particular area. Unselect the crop tool if you just want to generally make it a little bit bigger. Once again, we can switch into our pixel persona if we want to do any kind of photo editing and kind of selecting certain things. Maybe when we want to blur certain areas, maybe we want to blur the bottom here, and maybe we want to sharpen the top of the image, kind of give it a little bit more of a lens blur effect. And then we switch right back into kind of our vector mode or our designer persona, and we can add some typography here. We can scale this back. We can reduce the opacity of this photo by going to fill opacity right here in the effects panel. I'm going to go ahead and drag that out. We can screen that back a little bit. We can add all sorts of effects. So let's screen that back a little bit. We're going to go ahead and add just a little bit of color. I'm just adding a solid box here. I'm going to bring that back into the layering system. I'm going to be holding down Command and left bracket to send it backwards. And you can also do that manually using these buttons up top, move to back. There's also back one, so you can kind of click on that several times to move it to the back, and then you can move it forward. So you can do the little command shortcut where I do Command left and right bracket, or you can do right here in this area to be able to shift that layer back and forth. So let's add some type on here. I'm going to go to our type tool. There's two different types tools. There's the frame text tool, which I can click and drag, and just like Adobe InDesign, I can type an entire paragraph. And you can go ahead and scale this just like a text box, which is really, really helpful when it comes to layout design. Or you can do the other option, which is going to be your artistic text tool. So this is what you're going to be using for just typing single lines or particular letters. So this is going to be cheesy, but at least it's showing you an idea of kind of the power of layout here. So I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit smaller. You can always edit your type up here manually or do keyboard shortcuts. Go ahead and find a typeface here I think would work. Let's go ahead and shift that over so we can see a live preview. So I picked Azo Sans Black as our typeface of choice, a nice bold typeface. There's a couple ways we can edit type here. I'm going to go ahead and click up here by default. Here's kind of where you can kind of select the size and the typeface. If you click over here, right here on this button right here, it says character. Go ahead and click on character. It's going to give you all your editing options for your typography. And you'll notice instead of by using points like Adobe Illustrator does, they use points to determine what's the difference between the different characters. Here they actually use a percentage. So I'm doing 440%, just they use percentages. It's just like a little small difference there. So just kind of creating some dramatic spacing here. Let's go ahead and do 1000%. Just some dramatic spacing. And you could do a subscript, you could do all these extra things down here. You could do all caps. All this is in the character panel, which you can call up clicking right here. It took me a while to kind of figure out where that character editing panel is. Of course, you have your paragraph panel right here. So this is just like an Illustrator, your paragraph options right here. And then you also have your character panel. So you can kind of toggle between both of those options to get the right alignment and to get the right kind of all caps and spacing. So we can go ahead and close that out. Let's add a little bit of a drop shadow. I'm in the effects panel. I just drag that little panel out here, and we can do a Gaussian blur effect, kind of create something really neat. We can do a drop shadow, which in this case is called an outer shadow. There's also outer glow. All these are very similar to the options you have in Photoshop in your layers panel. All of that's going to be very, very similar. So let's say we want to duplicate this effect and make another line. Just going to copy and paste it. I can go back into my character panel. I can quickly edit the size. It's going to do a little bit of a live preview of what size it's going to be. I can change the tracking, maybe bring it down to 400%. You know, just something really cheesy, nothing too exciting. And then we have kind of a little type hierarchy going on here. Maybe let's say I don't want the drop shadow on here. I want to go back and change that. There's also something really neat called the styles panel. I'm going to go ahead and just drag that out. You can apply all these pre-made styles, and they're actually pretty decent compared to the ones you'll find in Adobe products. I'm going to go ahead and select our main earth and toggle between a few of these to get some really cool effects. Just really wonderful texture work here on some of these, really high quality effects. So I'm going to go ahead and create a solid shape. I could create kind of a little bit of an effect, a photo effect here. And I'm going to use what's called the transparency tool. So this is similar to the gradient tool, or in this case the fill tool, but it's going to add a little bit of a transparency. So I'm just going to click and drag. And it's going to add that blue, but it's going to have a transparency node. So it's going to go from a fill color all the way down to a transparency mode. So it's very similar to a gradient, but it's just transparent on the end. And of course you can double click this and change the color. It doesn't have to be blue, it can be any color. So I'm going to send that backwards into the layering system. I can go up here and do it, or I could do my little command left bracket and send it slowly back. Just adding a little bit of effect there. I can go back and change it so it's facing the other direction. And of course, with anything I do, I can always reduce the opacity, fill opacity right here in the effects panel. So there we have it, just kind of a little bit of a quick graphic there using Affinity Designer. There's a lot of really more polished tools here that I think are some ways superior. They don't have quite as many options as Adobe Illustrator, but you can really accomplish everything that you want to do with logo design, with shapes, creating icons, creating layouts, exporting. You have all these different personas, which is really nice to even have this as an option in a vector program to be able to select particular things in a raster image. You don't have that ability in Adobe Illustrator. So there's a lot of really great tools. I've really enjoyed getting to know it. I want to teach more of Affinity Designer. So look forward to kind of more lessons on that, but I wanted to give you a brief overview for everyone who wants an alternative to Adobe Illustrator, but they can't afford the Adobe Creative Suite subscription. It could be $50 or more every month. That's very expensive. It's great for those who use multiple Adobe programs or who like to use all the extras you get with Adobe, like a free portfolio website, free fonts. You get all that with Adobe Creative Suite, but if you don't need that or if you can't afford that, being able to spend less than $50 for one program and you never have to spend that money again, you already own the program, you don't have to spend any more money than that one-time purchase. This is a great alternative. So hopefully you've seen how close and how viable it is as an alternative to Adobe Illustrator. They have other ones. They just came out with another program called Affinity Publisher, which is very similar to InDesign. And they also have one that's kind of a Photoshop kind of replacement, which is Affinity Photo. So they really have a replacement for all three of those main graphic designer tools. And I just wanted to kind of present this to give you an option, not make you feel like you're stuck using Adobe. I know a lot of students have emailed me and said, I just can't afford Adobe's tools. Can I use Affinity Designer in your class? And I wanted to create this section so that you guys are people who are using Affinity or interested in using Affinity Designer will feel right at home with some of the tools and some of the lessons I'll be using throughout the class when I switch back to the Adobe products.